Imagine entering a bar, weary, thirsty, all you need is a sip of water. And what if the bartender staring at you directly and then spitting in your drink? Many would react negatively, some might leave in disgust. But if the man sitting there was not just some random individual, if it was someone who had endured war and someone who didn't show hesitation when things got rough, that is precisely what happened that day, when an act of simple disrespect led to death. So, let's dive in. He did not enter the bar to create a scene. He was tired, silent, and thirsty. He only wanted a glass of water, a basic request, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet once he took his seat, the atmosphere of the room had already made its decision about him. The bartender gave him his water, moved close, and without a pause, he spat directly into the glass. This act was not by mistake, it was intentional. He looked at it, paused for a moment, and then moved the glass away from him. "Did you spit in this?" he asked.
Did you spit in this?
What?
He was calm, he was collected, he was not yelling. The bartender did not even try to hide the truth. Rather, he laughed and began insulting him, ridiculing his background and everything he stood for.
Wounded knee? What happened there? Didn't you feel like being Americans anymore?
Silence fell in the room, but not out of shock, out of anticipation. Anticipation of what would happen next. The man, however, did not lose his cool. He placed some cash on the bar and asked for a drink, which the bartender obliged him with. However, the taunting did not cease. It only got louder and nastier until the man stood up and said something. And what did he say?
How about a man who did 3 tours in Vietnam who's got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star?
Who, you?
He fought for that country which was now insulting him. There was an eerie silence in the room. However, pride can be stubborn sometimes. That is why when the man left the bar after finishing his drink, he was followed by a gang of thugs. The air outside seemed colder and heavier. The sound of their laughter could be heard from behind him, growing louder as they drew nearer. He was surrounded by them close to the perimeter of the parking lot, confident because of the sheer number of them. He looked at them, turning slowly and not backing down. For him, this was nothing new. He had been through much tougher encounters than a bunch of loud mouths in a dark parking lot. "You should have walked away," he said softly. No warning screamed in anger, only a simple statement of fact. They did not listen. That would prove to be their mistake. Meanwhile, far from that club, the Gart's family were crumbling apart. The head of the Gart family, Otto Gart, was the embodiment of cruelty who had created his own empire by instilling terror. However, upon hearing about an encroaching gang taking their land, his fury drove him to suffer a stroke, making him unable to lead his empire anymore. Silence following the departure of such a cruel man became even scarier than anything else. Control was slipping out of the tight grip that Otto Gart once maintained, leading his 3 sons to circle the power right from under his throne. The oldest brother was aggressive and brutal, seeing fear as the only way power could communicate. To him, leadership meant dominance, and any pause was a sign of weakness. The second brother was his exact opposite. He was cool-headed, calculating, and methodical as swell. He knew how things worked, how to build alliances, the consequences of actions. The youngest brother was irresponsible, constantly trying to prove himself. It wouldn't be long before the drive to prove himself brought him crashing down. One wrong step, one emotionally driven decision, and the very fear Otto had used to keep his enemies at bay would bring them into his inner circle. Control no longer existed, not when Otto's empire had been maintained through sheer aggression. Hence, nothing lasted forever in the family of wolves. Just a few days before, the youngest son entered a restaurant armed with a gun, attempting to instill terror into a judge's heart. He did not intend to harm anyone, but he only wished to gain power through intimidation that was control, attention, terror, and obedience. The power he thought he could achieve just by virtue of being the son of the family. Yet the judge neither trembled nor pleaded. Instead, she addressed him as if he were nothing but an ordinary, frightened youth holding a weapon much too heavy for him to wield. Her calm demeanor unnerved him far more than her defiance ever would. It was then that the judge began to speak, revealing all the flaws in his perceived strength.
Son, you have 3 seconds to pick your ass up and get out of here, or I'm going to squash you like a bug.
His lack of confidence grew when she uttered those words that pierced through his bravado and arrogance. The feeling of control wasn't there this time, and it just felt wrong. A sense of panic seeped into him silently, then took hold quickly. He clutched the gun, not because he was in charge, but because he was afraid. There was a single shot fired, which broke the fantasy that he had created for himself. Everything became automatic after that. There was screaming and shouting, and chaos ensued. All that mattered was to run, to flee from everything around him. Out onto the road, he barely saw the car coming before he got hit. The collision was swift, brutal, and conclusive in the manner that repercussions sometimes are after panic overtakes composure. Peggy was driving the car. Initially, she wasn't even aware of what was taking place. The one moment the street was deserted. In another minute, there was a person lying on the road. Panic ensued immediately. Peggy couldn't breathe, trembling so uncontrollably that she could barely steer the car. However, instead of halting and summoning for help, she acted on impulse. She drove on. The victim was still breathing when she took him to her residence. Semi-conscious, taken into the dark shelter of the garage, as though she wasn't sure how to handle the situation. However, everything changed once her husband, Ed, found out about the truth behind it all. Ed knew the man, Ed saw the blood, and Ed saw the future coming down on them faster than they can ever control. It's not clear which took over the moment. Maybe it was fear, maybe anger, maybe survival instinct. The man started to speak, his voice weak, broken, but still alive. But Ed wasn't listening. Ed wasn't thinking. All he did was react, grabbing a shovel from wherever it lay and striking with an accuracy driven by desperation to wipe away what he sees. Once, again, and then, silence filled the garage, heavier than anything else that happened before. And just like that, an accident had become something far more permanent, a murder. They cleaned up their mess, scrubbing away the blood and removing any evidence, certain nobody would ever know what happened. They were wrong about the world they now found themselves in. This wasn't just an ordinary guy. His family is known for never forgetting and never forgiving. The moment the Gart's son went missing, they sprang into action, deploying their most reliable resource. Himself, the same guy they sent down to the bar. He worked slowly, because the truth never needed haste, only accuracy. He saw things other people missed, like bits of glass beside the road, unusual markings that should have never been there, tire tracks not quite in tune, and a car fixed too fast to cover up its repairs. These facts on their own were meaningless, but when taken together, they pointed the way. Every step, every turn, became more certain. There was nothing left to wonder about, only to be sure of what was already known. And all roads ended in the same place, somewhere ordinary, somewhere quiet, somewhere still believing it was safe. By contrast, the Garts showed no mercy to their enemies, and it was not long before things escalated. Suspicion turned to certainty, and certainty meant one thing to them: an attack. They turned streets into battlegrounds, and negotiations into ambushes. Attacks followed attacks without pause until everyone had lost track of how it had all started but knew that it must go on. Caught up in the midst of the chaos were two individuals who thought that they could keep a mistake well buried. In a place like this, though, everything comes to light sooner or later. Every mistake made has its price, and everything gets dragged to the surface under such pressure. Gradually, things converged. The pieces of the puzzle became clearer and clearer, leading towards one inevitable conclusion: to an isolated roadside motel. First came the Garts, then came their enemies, and finally came the police, arriving too late to stop what had already happened. The hitman, in turn, had been waiting patiently for the arrival of everyone else, calm and certain in his mind. Shooting started suddenly. The rooms became the scene of battle. Lives ended in an instant. Everything crumbled before anyone knew what was happening. It ended in the demise of the Gart Empire, destroyed in one night's bloodshed. Ed did not live on and died. Peggy survived, but her sanity was shattered by all that she witnessed. But what about the killer? The killer did not stick around. He did not glance back once. It was the first time he simply walked away. He was basically sick of everything and just wanted a new environment to start over. Nothing more to owe anyone anymore. Nothing more to accomplish. It all began with something insignificant: a cup of water, an act of disrespect, a decision that appeared trivial at the very time it was made. However, some actions have effects that go much farther than what can ever be thought. For there are times when the most threatening individuals are the ones that don't appear so threatening at all. They remain silent and wait for the right time to come. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoyed this story recap, go ahead and hit that like button, drop a comment, and of course subscribe for more stories just like this.